The interplanetary auction market was a cacophony of noise, flashing lights, and the constant drone of traders. Merchandise of all kinds lined the walls of the massive dome structure. But in a far corner, away from the premium goods, was where they kept the defective stock. Lyra sat huddled in her tiny cage, her iridescent skin dulled from weeks without proper nutrition. The tag attached to her wrist bore the insulting mark that had followed her for years. Defective. Returns accepted within 30 cycles. She'd been returned 5 times already. Each return had only reinforced what her previous owners had said about her. Disobedient, unpredictable, damaged. She didn't bother looking up anymore when potential buyers passed by. What was the point? They'd read her record, see the returns, and move on to more reliable merchandise. The auction house manager had already warned her that one more return would earn her the waste product designation, a virtual death sentence in the interplanetary trade routes. The crowd was thinning as the day's trading hours neared their end. Lyra could hear the auctioneer's voice growing hoarse, desperate to move the last of the day's stock. Then, a shadow fell across her cage. "This one, how much?" The voice was deep, steady, human. The auction manager scurried over. "Ah, sir, you don't want this one. She's been returned 5 times for behavioral issues. We have much better specimens." "I asked for the price, not your opinion." There was no hostility in the voice, just quiet determination. Lyra risked a glance upward. The human was tall, with weathered skin that spoke of years spent under different suns. His clothing was practical, the outfit of a spacer, someone who spent their life moving between worlds. Most noticeable were his eyes, calm, assessing, but not cold like the others who had purchased her before. 15,000 credits, the manager said, clearly hoping the outrageous price would drive the human away. To Lyra's shock, the man pulled out a credit chip without hesitation. "Done," the manager sputtered. "But sir, the behavior problems are no longer your concern." The man's tone made it clear the conversation was over. He slid the credit chip across to the manager, who verified it with obvious surprise. As the cage door swung open, Lyra remained huddled in the corner. This had to be some kind of mistake. No one paid full price for defective merchandise, especially not without negotiation. "My name is Merrick," the human said, keeping a respectful distance. "I'm not going to hurt you. I have a ship docked in Bay 12. It's not fancy, but it's warm and safe." Lyra didn't move. She'd heard similar promises before. Marek didn't seem bothered by her hesitation. "I'm an engineer. I travel between systems, fixing things that others can't, or won't." He gestured to the open cage door. "You can come with me, or you can stay here and take your chances with the next buyer. Your choice." Choice. That was new. No one had offered her a choice before. With trembling limbs, Lyra slowly emerged from the cage. She expected a collar, a leash, or at minimum a firm grip on her arm, the usual methods buyers use to establish control. Instead, Marek simply nodded and began walking toward the exit, his pace deliberately slow. Lyra followed, maintaining a careful distance. All around, the market continued its frantic commerce, but she felt strangely disconnected from it now. They passed security checkpoints, where Marek calmly presented his newly acquired ownership papers, and guards looked at Lyra with the same disinterest they might show a piece of luggage. Outside the market dome, the spaceport sprawled in every direction. Countless ships of various designs were docked in numbered bays. True to his word, Marek led her to Bay 12, where a mid-sized cargo vessel sat. It wasn't the sleek luxury craft that some of her previous owners had possessed, nor was it a grimy transport ship. It was simply functional, well-maintained despite its obvious age. "Home sweet home," Marek said as the entry ramp descended. "After you." Lyra hesitated at the foot of the ramp. This was the moment when the act usually dropped, when new owners revealed their true intentions. "If you're hungry, I can prepare something," Merrick offered, still making no move to force her aboard. "The galley's small, but it has a synthesizer that makes decent food." Hunger won out over caution. Lyra hadn't eaten anything but minimum survival rations for days. She took a tentative step onto the ramp, then another, until she was inside the ship. The interior was surprisingly warm and well lit, lacking the institutional coldness of transport vessels or the ostentatious luxury of pleasure craft. It felt lived in. Tools were organized on workbenches. Odd mechanical trinkets and souvenirs from various worlds decorated the common areas. It smelled of machine oil, coffee, and something else, something homey that Lyra couldn't quite identify. "The galley is this way," Merrick said, leading her through the main corridor. "And there's a cabin you can use down that passage. It has its own washroom. The door locks from the inside." Lyra stopped, staring at him. A private room? With a lock that she controlled? Marek seemed to understand her confusion. "Everyone deserves privacy and safety," he said simply, then continued toward the galley. The food synthesizer produced a bowl of something warm and savory, a stew with flavors Lyra didn't recognize, but found immediately comforting. Marek sat across from her with his own bowl, eating quietly and making no demands for conversation. When she'd finished, he showed her to the cabin he'd mentioned. It was small, but clean, with a comfortable-looking bed and a small viewport that currently showed the bustling spaceport outside. "Rest if you'd like," Merrick said. "We're not departing until tomorrow. The door locks, as I said. I'll be in the cockpit if you need anything." And with that, he left her alone. Lyra stood in the middle of the cabin, waiting for the other shoe to drop. When nothing happened, she cautiously pressed the button that sealed the door, then engaged the lock. A small green light confirmed that the lock was active. For the first time in years, she was in a space that was, temporarily at least, hers alone. She sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the simple comfort of it. Sleep claimed her almost instantly, her exhausted body finally relaxing in the unfamiliar sensation of safety. Lyra woke to the gentle hum of engines warming up. For a moment, panic seized her. She'd overslept, failed to attend to whatever duties her new owner expected. But then, she remembered Merrick's words from the previous day. The door was still locked, the green indicator light still glowing. A soft chime sounded, followed by Merrick's voice over the ship's intercom. "Good morning. We're preparing for departure in about 30 minutes. There's no rush, but you're welcome to join me in the cockpit if you'd like to see the takeoff. No demand, just an invitation." Lyra hesitated, then disengaged the lock. She found her way to the cockpit, where Merrick was going through pre-flight checks, his fingers dancing over the controls with practiced ease. "Did you sleep well?" he asked without looking up. Lyra nodded, then realized he couldn't see the gesture. "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Good." Merrick finished a sequence and swiveled his chair toward her. "I thought we could talk about expectations." "Here it comes," Lyra thought, her muscles tensing. "I travel between systems doing repair work," Merrick explained. "Some jobs are simple, some complex. I could use an assistant, someone to hand me tools, hold things in place, learn the basics of what I do. That's what I hope you might consider doing." "That's all." Lyra couldn't keep the suspicion from her voice. "That's all," Merrick confirmed. "You'll have your own cabin, as you've seen. Regular meals. I pay assistant rate for the work. It's not much, but it's yours to save or spend as you wish. If you decide this arrangement isn't working for you, I'll take you to any port where you feel you'd have better options." It sounded too good to be true. "Why me?" Lyra asked. "Why pay full price for damaged goods?" A shadow crossed Merrick's face. "First, you're not goods. You're a person. Second, I don't believe you're damaged. He turned back to the controls. I've spent my life fixing things others have given up on. Sometimes, all that's needed is a little patience and the right environment. The ship's engines rose from a hum to a steady rumble. Outside the viewport, the spaceport ground crew gave final clearance signals. We're cleared for departure, Merrick said. You might want to strap in. Lyra settled into the co-pilot seat and secured the safety harness. As the ship lifted off, leaving the auction planet behind, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a very long time. Hope. The first weeks aboard Merrick's ship, the Restoration, passed in a cautious dance of boundaries being established and gradually relaxed. Merrick was true to his word. He showed Lyra the basics of his work, starting with simple tasks like organizing tools and gradually progressing to assisting with actual repairs. Their first job was on a small mining outpost, fixing environmental systems that had begun to fail. Lyra watched as Marek patiently dismantled complex machinery, identified the problems, and put everything back together in better condition than he'd found it. "Hand me the phase coupler," he'd say, and Lyra would carefully select the tool from the organized case. At first, she'd flinch when she made a mistake, expecting punishment, but Marek would simply say, "Not that one, the one with the blue handle," and wait for her to correct the error. After the job was complete and they were back aboard the Restoration, Marek transferred credits to a small account he'd set up in Lyra's name. It wasn't much, as he'd warned, but it was the first money that had ever belonged to her alone. "What do I do with it?" she asked, staring at the account balance on the datapad. "Whatever you want," Marek replied. "Save it. Spend it on something that brings you joy. It's yours." The concept was almost too big to grasp. Something that was hers, with no conditions attached. Their second job took them to a bustling space station, a hub of commerce and culture. While Marek worked on the station's communications array, he gave Lyra permission to explore the public areas, alone. He gave her a communicator to stay in touch, and simply asked that she return to the docking bay by a certain time. Freedom, even temporary, was dizzying. Lyra walked through the station's markets and plazas, marveling at the diversity of species and goods. When a vendor offered her a sample of sweet fruit, she automatically looked around for an owner whose permission she needed to seek. The realization that she could simply accept or decline on her own nearly brought tears to her eyes. She returned to the ship well before the appointed time, clutching a small package wrapped in colorful paper, her first purchase. Inside was a simple bracelet, made of polished stones from various worlds. "It's beautiful," Marek said when she shyly showed him. "Good choice." But despite these small steps forward, the shadows of Lyra's past still clung to her. Nightmares frequently woke her, leaving her trembling in the dark of her cabin. During the day, certain sounds or movements would trigger memories that froze her in place, her breathing shallow and rapid. Marek noticed, but never pried. Instead, he began teaching her coping techniques. "When it gets overwhelming, focus on your senses," he advised. 5 things you can see, 4 you can touch, 3 you can hear, 2 you can smell, 1 you can taste. It helps ground you in the present. Gradually, Lyra began to trust that this new reality might be permanent. She grew more confident with tools, developing a particular aptitude for delicate calibration work that Marek praised genuinely. Her nightmares didn't disappear, but they became less frequent. One evening, as they were having dinner in the galley after a particularly successful repair job, Marek said casually, "I've been doing some research." Lyra looked up from her food, waiting. "About your origins," he continued. "If that's something you want to know about. If not, we can drop the subject entirely." Lyra's past before the auction houses was a blur of confusion and fear. She'd been so young when she entered the system that her memories were fragmented at best. What did you find?" she asked hesitantly. Marek pulled out a datapad. Records indicate you were found on an abandoned colony outpost in the Vega sector. The colony had been evacuated during the Thalosian conflict, but somehow you were left behind. Rescue teams found you and several other children, all transferred to various care facilities. Lyra's hands trembled slightly. Do I have a real name? Not just the one the auction house gave me? Marek nodded. According to the records, your birth name is Lyra Alanis Noor. You were born on the colony world of Newhold. Lyra Alanis Noor. The name resonated somewhere deep inside her, like a bell that had been silent for too long. What happened to the others? The other children? Marek's expression darkened. The system failed them, just as it failed you. When funding for the refugee program was cut, many ended up in private care facilities. Most of those were fronts for the labor market. The labor market, the polite term for what was essentially a slavery network operating in the shadows of interplanetary law. Lyra had been lucky, in a way. As a child, she'd been too small for heavy labor, so she'd been sold as a domestic servant instead. Not that it had been much better. Is my homeworld still there, Newhold? She asked. It was resettled after the conflict ended. It's a functioning colony again, though I've never been there myself. Marek hesitated. Would you like to go someday, to see it? The question hung in the air between them. Did she want to connect with a past she barely remembered? Or was it better to focus on building something new? I don't know, she admitted finally. Maybe someday. Marek nodded, understanding in his eyes. There's no rush. The information isn't going anywhere. That night, Lyra lay awake in her cabin, whispering her full name to herself like a mantra. Lyra Alanis Noor. A real name, a history, an identity beyond defective merchandise. It was both terrifying and exhilarating. The Restoration was docked at a refueling station when the first warning signs appeared. Marek had gone to negotiate a new job with a potential client, leaving Lyra aboard to inventory their supplies. She was in the cargo hold when the ship's proximity alert chimed, indicating someone approaching the external hatch. Expecting Marek's return, Lyra made her way to the airlock, but when the external camera feed showed 3 unfamiliar figures, 2 humans, and a burly Krevlox, instinct sent her retreating into the shadows of the corridor. The access panel beside the airlock lit up as someone attempted to override the security protocols. These weren't random thieves. They knew what they were doing. Lyra's heart pounded as she slipped into the maintenance crawlspace, a hiding spot she'd discovered during her exploration of the ship. Through a ventilation grate, she could see the airlock door finally slide open. The 3 intruders entered cautiously, weapons drawn. "Sweep the ship," ordered the lead human, a woman with a facial scar that pulled her mouth into a permanent sneer. The tracker shows the merchandise is aboard. Merchandise. Lyra's blood turned to ice. They were looking for her. "Are you sure it's the right signal?" asked the second human, a thin man with cybernetic enhancements visible around his eyes. "These trackers aren't always reliable after so many years." "It's her," the woman confirmed. 5th-generation Alani hybrid, abandoned during the Thalosian evac. Do you know how much the research division will pay for pure samples, especially from one that's evaded recapture this long? They moved deeper into the ship, and Lyra retreated further into the crawlspace. Her mind raced. A tracker. They'd been tracking her. But how? The realization hit her with sickening clarity. The auction houses routinely implanted trackers in valuable merchandise to prevent theft. Hers must have remained dormant until something, perhaps Marek's research into her origins, had triggered it. She needed to warn Marek. The communicator he'd given her was in her cabin, too risky to retrieve now. But there was an emergency beacon in the cockpit that would alert him to danger. Moving silently through the maintenance tunnels that ran the length of the ship, Lyra made her way toward the cockpit. She could hear the intruders ransacking cabins, getting closer to her position. The maintenance access panel to the cockpit was just ahead, but reaching it would mean exposing herself momentarily in the main corridor. Taking a deep breath, Lyra counted to 3 and darted across the open space. She'd almost reached the access panel when a shout came from behind her. "There, in the corridor!" A blast of energy scorched the wall beside her head as Lyra dove through the access panel into the cockpit. She slammed her hand down on the emergency beacon, sending out the distress signal to Merrick's personal communicator. The ship's systems responded to her authorized presence, recognizing her as crew. "Intruder alert!" Lyra gasped to the ship's computer. "Lockdown Protocol Alpha!" The ship's AI acknowledged the command, immediately sealing bulkheads throughout the vessel. It wouldn't hold the intruders for long, but it might buy her some time. Lyra could hear them trying to override the bulkhead seals. The cockpit had only one exit to the main ship, now locked down. But there was also the emergency escape hatch that opened directly to the outside. If she used it, she could flee into the station, but that would mean abandoning the Restoration, abandoning the first home she'd known in years. Before she could decide, her communicator chimed. Merrick had received the distress signal and was sending a message. "Station security alerted. On my way. Hold position." Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by renewed fear. What if the intruders hurt Merrick? What if station security was corrupt, as it often was in refueling outposts like this one? The bulkhead to the cockpit shuddered as the intruders began cutting through it. Lyra looked around desperately for anything she could use to defend herself. The cockpit wasn't designed for combat, but among Merrick's tools, she found a plasma torch. Not a weapon, but better than nothing. The bulkhead's integrity was failing. Any moment now, they would break through. Lyra positioned herself beside the entry, plasma torch ready. She'd never fought anyone before, had always been taught that resistance was futile and would only make things worse. But now, with something worth protecting, the calculus had changed. The bulkhead gave way with a shower of sparks. As the first intruder pushed through the opening, Lyra activated the plasma torch, its blue flame casting eerie shadows across the cockpit. The intruder, the thin man with cybernetic eyes, raised his weapon, but Lyra was faster, swinging the torch in a wide arc that forced him to stumble backward. "Careful!" the woman leader shouted from behind him. "Don't damage the merchandise." The words ignited something in Lyra, rage at being reduced to a commodity, at having her newfound freedom threatened. With a cry that surprised even herself, she lunged forward, the plasma torch connecting with the intruder's weapon. The energy discharge sent them both reeling back, but Lyra recovered first, backing toward the pilot's seat where the ship's manual controls were located. The woman pushed her way into the cockpit, weapon trained on Lyra. "Enough games!" she snarled. "You're coming with us, one way or another." "I'm not merchandise," Lyra said, her voice steadier than she felt. "And I'm not going anywhere." The standoff was broken by a commotion from the ship's main corridor. Shouts, the distinctive sound of stun batons, a heavy thud. The woman's eyes darted toward the noise, and in that moment of distraction, Lyra acted. She slammed her hand down on the environmental controls, flooding the cockpit with the emergency fire suppressant gas. The dense fog instantly filled the space, obscuring vision and making it difficult to breathe. Using her familiarity with the cockpit layout, Lyra ducked low and moved around the edge of the room, avoiding the disoriented intruders. She reached the bulkhead just as Merrick appeared in the opening, accompanied by 2 station security officers. "Lyra!" Merrick's relief was palpable as he pulled her into the corridor. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to speak as the adrenaline began to ebb, leaving her trembling. The security officers moved past them into the cockpit, where the suppressant gas was already beginning to dissipate. Within moments, they had the intruders subdued and in restraints. As the woman was led past them, she spat in Lyra's direction. "This isn't over. Property always returns to its rightful owners." Marek stepped between them. His usually calm demeanor hardened to steel. She is not property. She never was. After the intruders were taken away, Marek and Lyra sat in the galley, both nursing hot drinks to combat the shock. Station security had promised to hold the captives until proper authorities could be notified. But both of them knew how unreliable such promises could be in remote stations. "They had a tracker on me," Lyra said finally. "From the auction house." Marek nodded grimly. "I suspected as much when I saw who they were. They're from a group called the Reclamation Syndicate. They specialize in recovering lost assets for various organizations." His expression darkened. "Including research facilities that operate outside legal jurisdiction. They said something about samples. Pure samples." Lyra's voice was barely audible. Marek set his mug down with deliberate care. "Your species, the Alani, have certain genetic adaptations that some consider valuable. Rapid healing, resistance to radiation, extended lifespan. The ethical research community studies these traits with volunteer participants. The unethical ones don't bother with consent." The implications made Lyra's skin crawl. "Will they come back?" "They might try," Marek admitted. "But not if we can find and deactivate that tracker." He hesitated. "It would require a medical scan. I know how you feel about medical procedures, so I won't proceed without your explicit permission." Lyra had avoided anything resembling medical equipment since coming aboard the Restoration. Too many memories of being examined like a specimen, treated as a test subject rather than a person. But now, the alternative was worse. "Do it," she said, her hands clenched into fists. "Find the tracker." The medical bay of the Restoration was small, but well-equipped. Marek had prepared it as comfortingly as possible, explaining each step before he took it. The scanner hummed as it passed over Lyra's body, creating a three-dimensional image on the display. "There," Marek said, pointing to a tiny bright spot near the base of Lyra's skull. "That's not biological." Lyra stared at the image, feeling violated all over again. "Can you remove it?" "Not safely. Not with the equipment we have here." Marek's expression was troubled. "It's too close to your cerebral stem. We need a proper medical facility, someone specialized in subcutaneous implant removal." "But if we go to a medical facility, they'll know where to find us," Lyra pointed out. "Not necessarily." Marek's eyes lit up with sudden inspiration. "The tracker broadcasts your identity marker, not your physical location. If we could mask that marker or create a decoy." He began pulling up schematics on the medical bay's computer, muttering to himself as he worked through the problem. Lyra watched him, struck by the realization that he was applying the same focused determination to protecting her that he did to his most challenging repair jobs. "I think I can build a signal dampener," he said finally. "It won't deactivate the tracker, but it will corrupt the signal enough to make it useless for tracking. Then, we can safely reach a medical facility to have it properly removed." Over the next day, Marek worked tirelessly, constructing a small device using components salvaged from the Restoration's spare parts. When it was finished, it looked like an elegant pendant on a chain. "It needs to stay within 30 centimeters of the tracker to work effectively," he explained, as he handed it to Lyra. "Wearing it as a necklace should maintain the proper distance." Lyra slipped the chain over her head, letting the pendant rest against her collarbone. It was warm against her skin, humming with barely perceptible energy. "Thank you," she said, the words inadequate for what she felt. Marek nodded, understanding the depth of what went unspoken. "We should leave this station as soon as possible. I don't trust the security here to hold those bounty hunters for long." They departed within hours, setting course for a system known for its advanced medical facilities. Lyra spent much of the journey in the cockpit with Marek, learning the basics of navigation and ship operations. It was a distraction from the anxiety of what lay ahead, but also something more, a sign of growing trust between them. "Why did you really buy me?" she asked, during a quiet stretch of automated flight. The truth. Marek was silent for so long that Lyra thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but clear. 10 years ago, I was working as an engineer on a colony ship. We received a distress signal from a refugee transport. Engine failure. Life support failing. By the time we reached them, most of the passengers were already gone. But there were children in stasis pods, meant to protect them during the journey. He paused, his gaze fixed on the starfield beyond the viewport. We got them out, got them to safety. Or so we thought. The colony administration promised to find homes for them, to give them care and education. I moved on to my next contract, believing I'd done my part. His hands tightened on the controls. 3 years later, I discovered that the children had been sold to private interests when the colony faced budget cuts. By then, they'd disappeared into the system. Lyra's throat tightened. You've been looking for them. When I can... Between jobs. It's not much, but... He shrugged. When I saw you in that cage, with that tag marking you as defective, disposable, I knew I couldn't walk away. Not again. I'm not one of those children, Lyra said gently. No, but you deserved rescue just as much as they did. Marek turned to face her fully. Everyone does. The medical facility on New Geneva was everything the refueling station had not been. Clean, orderly, and rigidly adherent to interplanetary law. The physician who examined Lyra, a soft-spoken Tyrellian with 6-fingered hands, confirmed what Marek had discovered. The implant is indeed positioned in a delicate area, she said, showing them enhanced scans. But we have procedures for safe removal. It's not uncommon for us to treat refugees from conflict zones who have been tagged with similar devices. And after removal, Marek asked, can it be traced back to her? The physician shook her head. Once removed, it will be destroyed according to our protocols. Patient confidentiality is absolute here. She looked directly at Lyra. You have my word. The procedure was scheduled for the following day. That night, in her private room at the medical center, Lyra found herself unable to sleep. The thought of being unconscious, vulnerable to medical procedures, brought back too many dark memories. When a soft knock came at her door, she was sitting by the window, watching the lights of the city below. May I come in? Marek asked from the doorway. Lyra nodded, grateful for the distraction from her thoughts. Marek sat in the chair opposite her, placing a small box on the table between them. I have something for you, he said. For after tomorrow's procedure. Curious, despite her anxiety. Lyra opened the box. Inside was a small, intricately designed key. It's a ship key, Marek explained. For the restoration... Lyra looked up, confused. But I already have access to the ship systems. This is different. This registers you as co-owner, not crew. Marek's expression was serious. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever you decide to do afterward, the restoration will always be as much yours as mine. The significance of the gesture left Lyra speechless. In a universe where she had been property, Marek was offering her ownership, not just of a vessel, but of her own destiny. I don't know what to say, she whispered finally. You don't have to say anything. Just know that you have options. Always. He stood to leave. Try to rest. I'll be here in the morning. After he'd gone, Lyra held the key tightly in her palm, its edges pressing into her skin, a tangible reminder that tomorrow would bring not just the removal of a tracker, but perhaps the final severance from her past as merchandise. The medical procedure went smoothly. The tracker removed and destroyed under Lyra's watchful gaze, once she'd recovered from the anesthesia. The small incision at the base of her skull was sealed with a regenerative patch that would leave no scar. Freedom looks good on you, Marek commented, as they prepared to leave the medical center the next day. Before Lyra could respond, an alert sounded on the public announcement system. Security breach in Sector 3. All personnel implement lockdown procedures. Marek and Lyra exchanged alarmed glances. It could be unrelated, he said, but his hand moved to the stunner concealed beneath his jacket. They were halfway to the exit when three figures appeared at the end of the corridor, the same bounty hunters from the refueling station, now equipped with more advanced weaponry. Behind them lay the crumpled forms of security personnel. "Run!" Marek pushed Lyra toward a side passage, as energy blasts scorched the wall where they'd been standing. They sprinted through the medical center's winding corridors, alarms blaring around them. Lyra's mind raced. How had the hunters found them? The tracker was gone, its signal no longer broadcasting her location. "They must have followed us from the station," Marek gasped as they ducked into a maintenance room. "Track the restoration instead of you." The realization was both relieving and terrifying. Without her tracker, the hunters had no special way of finding her, but they were still determined, still dangerous. "We need to reach the ship," Marek said, checking the small portable display that showed the medical center's layout. "There's a service exit 2 levels down that leads directly to the landing pads." They moved cautiously through the maintenance areas, avoiding the main corridors where the hunters would likely be searching. The distant sounds of pursuit ebbed and flowed, sometimes alarmingly close, sometimes fading to nothing. When they finally reached the service exit, Lyra felt a surge of hope. Just beyond the door, she could see the distinctive outline of the restoration on its landing pad. They were so close. "I'll go first," Marek whispered, easing the door open. "Cover to cover, all the way to the ship." He slipped out, Lyra following close behind. They moved from the shelter of one ground vehicle to another, the ship drawing steadily nearer. They were within 50 meters when a voice rang out. "Stop right there, or we start shooting civilians." The lead hunter, the scarred woman, stood on a nearby platform. Her weapon trained not on them, but on a group of medical staff who had been evacuating patients to a safe area. Her companions emerged from hiding places around the landing pad, cutting off escape routes. Marek and Lyra froze. "Let them go," Marek called. "They have nothing to do with this." "That depends on you," the woman replied coldly. "Send over the merchandise and we'll be on our way. No one else gets hurt." Lyra felt the familiar rush of terror, the instinct to submit that had been beaten into her over years of captivity. It would be so easy to give in, to spare these innocent people, to spare Marek. But then, she felt the weight of the ship key in her pocket. Co-owner, not crew, not cargo, a person with choices. "I am not merchandise," she said, her voice carrying across the landing pad with surprising strength. "And I'm not going anywhere with you." The hunter's face contorted with rage. "You don't get to decide that. You little—" Her words were cut short as Lyra darted forward, no longer frozen by fear. She'd spent months aboard the Restoration, learning not just how to hand Marek tools, but how ship systems worked, how to repair delicate mechanisms, how things connected. The landing pad's control panel was just meters away, its design familiar from countless similar systems she'd helped repair. Energy blasts sizzled past her as she dove for the panel, fingers flying over the controls. Alarms began to sound across the landing area as the automated fire suppression system activated, spraying visibility-obscuring foam across the pad. In the confusion, the medical staff broke free from their captors, running for safety. Marek seized the opportunity, drawing his stunner and firing at the hunters with remarkable accuracy despite the chaos. One went down immediately. The second staggered, but remained standing. The lead hunter ignored the foam and the fleeing civilians, her focus entirely on Lyra. She charged through the confusion, weapon raised. Lyra looked around desperately for anything to use as a weapon or shield. Her gaze fell on a maintenance drone docked beside the control panel. like many of the devices she'd helped Merrick repair. Its access panel was simple to open. Within seconds, she had rerouted its primary functions, overriding safety protocols. As the hunter reached her, Lyra activated the drone. It shot forward, its utility arms extended, catching the hunter in mid-stride. The woman's weapon discharged harmlessly into the air as she was knocked backward. Marek had reached the fallen hunter, kicking her weapon away and training his stunner on her. "It's over," he said firmly. "Station security is already on its way." The woman glared up at him with undisguised hatred. "You have no idea what you're interfering with. That thing is property of the Genomic Research Consortium. Corporate property rights are recognized in every system." "She is a person," Merrick replied, his voice like steel. "And persons cannot be property. That's recognized in every system, too." Real security forces were arriving now, surrounding the area with practiced efficiency. As the hunters were taken into custody, properly this time, with official charges filed, Merrick turned to Lyra with a look of amazement. "That was incredible," he said. "The way you handled the control panel, the drone." Lyra felt a strange new sensation spreading through her. Pride. Not just relief at surviving, but genuine pride in what she had accomplished. "I've been paying attention during your repairs," she said simply. Marek's smile was warm. "You certainly have." The aftermath of the confrontation brought official attention that neither of them had expected. The Interplanetary Citizen Protection Agency, alerted by the medical center's security breach, sent representatives to interview them. The existence of the Reclamation Syndicate was apparently of great interest to the agency, which had been building a case against illegal trafficking operations for years. In a sterile conference room, Lyra recounted her experiences, first hesitantly, then with growing confidence as the agency representatives listened with evident concern rather than dismissal. Merrick sat beside her, a steadfast presence but allowing her to tell her own story. "Your testimony could be crucial in our ongoing investigation," the lead agent explained, when Lyra had finished. "The Reclamation Syndicate is just one part of a larger network that has exploited legal loopholes to continue trafficking sentient beings." "Will they come after her again?" Merrick asked. The question Lyra herself was afraid to voice. The agent's expression was grave but determined. "Not if we can help it. Ms. Noor's case has brought to light several jurisdictional issues that need to be addressed. We're prepared to offer protected status while the legal proceedings continue." Protected status. The words seemed to hang in the air between them. It wasn't freedom, not exactly. It came with conditions, monitoring, obligations to testify. But it was recognition, official acknowledgement of her personhood, her right to safety. "And after the proceedings?" Lyra asked quietly. "Full citizenship rights," the agent replied, "including choice of residence and occupation. No restrictions." It was more than Lyra had dared to hope for. She glanced at Merrick, trying to gauge his reaction. His expression was carefully neutral, but she could see the pride in his eyes. "There's one more thing," the agent continued, sliding a datapad across the table. "According to our records, you're not the only one from your colony who ended up in the trafficking system. We've identified several others who may have similar implanted trackers. If you'd be willing, we could use your experience to help locate and extract them safely." Lyra stared at the datapad, which showed a list of names and last known locations. Others like her, still trapped, still classified as merchandise. The thought of them suffering as she had was almost unbearable. "I want to help," she said firmly, "but I need time to think about how—" The agent nodded, understanding. "Of course, this isn't a decision to make lightly." After the meeting, as they walked back to the restoration, Merrick was unusually quiet. Lyra could sense there was something he wanted to say, but was holding back. "What is it?" she asked when they reached the ship. Marek hesitated, then spoke carefully. The agency's offer is a good one. Protection, citizenship, a chance to help others. But I want you to know that whatever you decide, your place on the restoration remains. If you want it. The unspoken question hung between them. Would she stay, or would she go? Lyra reached into her pocket and withdrew the ship key he had given her. The metal caught the light, gleaming with possibility. "You gave me this because you wanted me to have choices," she said. "Real ones. Not just the illusion of choice that others offered." Marek nodded. "Everyone deserves that." "Then I choose both," Lyra said decisively. "I'll work with the agency to help find the others. But the restoration is my home. If you're willing to adjust our course sometimes to accommodate the agency's needs." "Of course," Marek said, relief evident in his voice. "The restoration has always gone where she's needed most." 3 months later. The restoration docked at the Central Governance Hub, a massive space station that served as the administrative center for multiple star systems. Lyra stood in the cockpit beside Marek, watching through the viewport as they were guided to their assigned berth. "Nervous?" Marek asked, noting her tense posture. "A little," Lyra admitted. "I've never testified before a governance council before." Today marked the formal hearing that would officially recognize her status as a free citizen, as well as establish precedent for others in similar situations. The Interplanetary Citizen Protection Agency had built a strong case, using Lyra's testimony and evidence gathered from the captured bounty hunters to expose the operations of both the Reclamation Syndicate and the Genomic Research Consortium. "You'll do fine," Marek assured her. "Just tell the truth, as you've done before." Since their encounter at the medical facility, they had worked closely with the agency, helping to locate and extract 3 other former colonists who had been sold into various forms of servitude. Each rescue had been challenging in its own way, but also profoundly rewarding. Lyra had watched as others like herself experienced the first tentative moments of freedom, had seen the same mixture of disbelief and hope in their eyes that she had felt aboard the restoration. "It's not the testimony that concerns me," she confessed. "It's what comes after. If the council rules in our favor, establishes the precedent, then many more will be freed," Marek finished. "And they'll all need to find their way, just as you have." That was the heart of it. Freedom was precious, but it was also terrifying. Lyra had had Marek to guide her through those first uncertain days and weeks. Who would help the others? "I've been thinking," she said slowly, "about what comes next. For me. For the restoration." "Oh?" Marek raised an eyebrow, curious. "The agency has suggested creating a transition program for those recovered from trafficking situations. Safe houses, skill training, psychological support." Lyra took a deep breath. "They've asked if I would consider taking a role in it, using my experience to help others adjust." Marek's expression softened. "That sounds perfect for you." "But it would mean changes for the restoration," Lyra continued. "We'd need to modify the ship to accommodate more people temporarily. Our repair jobs would need to work around the transition schedule." She looked at him uncertainly. "It's a lot to ask." Marek's laugh was unexpected. "Lyra, when I found you in that auction house, I had no idea my life was about to change completely. Every adjustment since then has been worth it." He gestured around the cockpit. "The restoration was always meant to fix broken things. Now she'll help fix broken lives too. I can't think of a better purpose." Relief and gratitude washed over Lyra. "So you're okay with it? With turning the restoration into a kind of rescue ship?" "More than okay," Marek assured her. "Though we'll need help. Can't manage a transition program and repairs all on our own." "The agency has resources," Lyra said, her mind already racing with possibilities. "And some of those we've already helped have expressed interest in joining the effort." Prella has engineering experience, and Kivo is a trained medic. Marek nodded approvingly. Sounds like we're building a crew. The docking procedure completed with a gentle thud as the Restoration settled into its berth. Through the viewport, Lyra could see agency representatives waiting to escort them to the council chambers. Ready? Marek asked, standing and offering his hand. Lyra took it, feeling the strength of their partnership. Ready. The council chambers were vast and imposing, designed to humble those who entered. Representatives from dozens of worlds sat in tiered seating, their attention focused on the testimony floor, where Lyra now stood. Marek and the agency advocates sat nearby, offering silent support. As Lyra recounted her experiences, the years of being bought and sold, the dehumanizing conditions, the constant fear, she kept her voice steady. This wasn't just her story anymore. It was the story of countless others who had no voice, who were still waiting for someone to recognize their personhood. When she had finished, the head counselor, a venerable Altarian with silver skin, leaned forward. Ms. Noor, your courage in coming forward is commendable. Before we deliberate, is there anything else you wish the council to consider? Lyra hadn't prepared for this question, but the answer came naturally. Yes, I want the council to understand that what happened to me wasn't just a legal violation. It was a moral one. Every sentient being deserves the chance to determine their own fate, to build a life of their choosing. She straightened her shoulders. And I want the council to know that I stand ready to help others who have been denied that chance. The deliberations lasted hours, but when the council reconvened, their decision was unanimous. The practice of sentient trafficking, regardless of origin or species, was declared illegal across all affiliated systems. The precedent would ripple outward, forcing even non-affiliated worlds to reconsider their practices or face economic and diplomatic isolation. More personally for Lyra, her citizenship was formally recognized, all records of her time as merchandise expunged, and her right to self-determination enshrined in official documentation. As they left the council chambers, Lyra felt lighter somehow, as if a weight she'd carried for so long had finally been lifted. Outside, a small group awaited them, the 3 former captives they had helped rescue, along with agency workers who had supported the case. Prella, a willowy being with luminescent skin, stepped forward to embrace Lyra. "You've done it," she whispered. "You've opened the door for all of us." Kivo, more reserved but equally moved, simply clasped Lyra's hand in his 3-fingered grip. "What happens now?" he asked. Lyra looked to Marek, who nodded encouragingly. "Now," she said, "we build something new, together." In the days that followed, the Restoration underwent its transformation. With agency funding and volunteer assistance, additional living quarters were constructed, medical facilities expanded, and communal spaces created. The ship that had once been Marek's solitary home was becoming a community. Lyra oversaw much of the work, applying the technical skills she'd developed under Marek's guidance. Each modification was designed with purpose. The medical bay arranged to be welcoming rather than clinical, the living quarters offering both privacy and connection, the common areas fostering a sense of belonging. As the physical changes took shape, so too did the program itself. Agency psychologists worked with Lyra to develop protocols for helping new arrivals adjust. Former captives who had already begun their journey to recovery volunteered to serve as mentors. A network of safe houses on various worlds was established for those who preferred planetary living to shipboard life. Throughout it all, Marek remained a steady presence, offering technical expertise, logistical support, and quiet encouragement. Though the Restoration was transforming around him, he seemed more at peace than Lyra had ever seen him. "You don't mind?" she asked one evening, as they surveyed the newly completed communal dining area. "All these changes, all these people in your space?" Marek considered the question seriously. For years, I traveled alone, trying to atone for what I saw as my failure, not following up on those children, not making sure they were safe. I did what good I could, one repair job at a time. He gestured around them. This is better. This is what the restoration was always meant to be. Their first official rescue mission came sooner than expected. The agency received intelligence about a transport ship carrying indentured workers, a common euphemism for trafficked individuals, making an unscheduled stop at a remote mining outpost. The Restoration, with its newly assembled crew, was the closest vessel capable of intervention. With agency authorization backing them, they intercepted the transport as it attempted to leave the outpost. The confrontation was brief but tense, the transport captain ultimately surrendering when faced with official sanctions and the determined faces of the Restoration's crew. Aboard the transport, they found 12 individuals of various species, all bearing the telltale implants that marked them as tracked merchandise. The conditions were appalling: cramped holding cells, inadequate nutrition, no medical care. It was a stark reminder of what they were fighting against. Lyra led the extraction team, her own experiences guiding her approach. She spoke softly, moved slowly, explained everything before it happened. The fear and suspicion in the captive's eyes was painfully familiar. "You're safe now," she told them as they were transferred to the Restoration. "No one will hurt you here. No one will sell you or return you." Some believed her immediately, desperate for hope. Others remained wary, convinced this was some new deception. Lyra understood both reactions all too well. Back aboard the Restoration, the real work began. Medical exams were conducted with the utmost respect for boundaries and consent. Nutrition was carefully monitored, psychological support offered without pressure. Most importantly, choices were given at every step: what to eat, where to sleep, whether to talk or remain silent. Lyra found herself working closely with a young Tyrellian girl who reminded her painfully of herself. The child, who gave her name as Miri, had been sold as a domestic servant, just as Lyra had been. She flinched at sudden movements and kept her eyes downcast when spoken to. "I was like you once," Lyra told her one evening, as they sat together in the observation lounge, watching the stars. "Afraid all the time, waiting for the next punishment, the next sale." Miri glanced up briefly, then away. "Did it stop, the fear?" "Not all at once," Lyra admitted. "It took time, safe places, people who respected my boundaries." She gestured around them. "Like this ship, like Marek, and now our whole crew. And if I'm broken," Miri's voice was barely audible, "if I can't be fixed?" The question struck at Lyra's heart. How many times had she thought the same about herself? "You're not broken," she said firmly. "You're wounded. There's a difference. Wounds can heal, even if they leave scars." She held out her hand, palm up, offering but not demanding contact. "And you don't need to be fixed, because you were never a thing to begin with. You are a person. Always were. Always will be." After a long moment, Miri placed her small hand in Lyra's. It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it was a beginning. Over the following months, the Restoration continued its dual mission of technical repairs and personal restoration. They traveled between worlds, accepting legitimate repair contracts, while also responding to agency alerts about trafficking operations. Their reputation grew, both as skilled engineers and as a haven for those recovering from captivity. Some of those they rescued moved on to agency safe houses, or found new lives on welcoming worlds. Others, like Miri, chose to remain aboard, gradually taking on responsibilities as they healed. The Restoration's crew expanded, becoming a diverse family bound by shared purpose, rather than shared species or origin. Lyra's role evolved as well. While she still participated in technical repairs, her primary focus became the transition program. She developed training modules for other rescue operations, testified in further legal proceedings, and mentored new arrivals through their early days of freedom. The terrified girl from the auction house had become a leader, her painful past transformed into a source of wisdom and empathy. 1 year after the Council's landmark ruling, the Restoration returned to the Central Governance Hub for an official recognition ceremony. The transition program had exceeded all expectations, with over 100 former captives successfully integrated into free society and numerous trafficking operations disrupted. As Lyra stood beside Merrick on the ceremony platform, listening to the head counselor's speech about progress and justice, she felt a gentle touch on her arm. Turning, she saw Miri, now serving as the Restoration's junior communications officer, her eyes bright with excitement. "They're announcing the new initiative," Miri whispered. Lyra nodded, a surge of pride warming her chest. The New Beginnings Initiative, inspired by the Restoration's work, would establish similar transition programs on multiple worlds, expanding their reach exponentially. When the ceremony concluded, the Restoration's crew gathered in their ship's communal area for a celebration of their own. The space was filled with laughter, music, and the happy chatter of people who had found purpose and belonging. Looking around at the faces, some she had helped rescue, others who had joined their cause along the way, Lyra felt a sense of completion that once would have seemed impossible. Marek joined her at the viewport, where she had stepped away for a moment of quiet reflection. "Quite a change from that auction house," he commented, following her gaze to the stars beyond. "Quite a change," Lyra agreed. The universe that had once seemed so hostile, so full of people willing to buy and sell sentient beings, now held possibility, connection, even beauty. "The agency has asked if we'd consider taking the Restoration to the outer reaches," Merrick said. "They've had reports of trafficking operations taking advantage of the limited governance there." "The outer reaches," Lyra repeated thoughtfully. "That's a long journey." "It is," Merrick acknowledged. "But if anyone can make a difference out there, it's this crew, this ship." He looked at her questioningly. "What do you think? Ready for a new adventure?" Lyra considered the question, not as the frightened girl from the auction house or even as the newly freed person finding her way, but as the woman she had become, confident in her skills, secure in her connections, certain of her purpose. "The outer reaches have never seen anything like the Restoration," she said with a smile. "Let's show them what freedom looks like." Around them, the celebration continued, a testament to how far they had come, and a promise of how far they might yet go. The ship that had once been one man's solitary home had become a beacon of hope, a vehicle not just for interstellar travel, but for transformation itself. And Lyra, once tagged as defective merchandise, had found not just a home but a calling. In rescuing others, she had fully rescued herself, completing a journey from object to person, from possession to possessor of her own destiny. As the Restoration prepared for its new mission, Lyra stood on the bridge, the ship key Merrick had given her, now joined by the command codes that recognized her as senior officer. The vastness of space spread before them, no longer a void to be feared but a frontier filled with possibilities. "Course set for the outer reaches," she announced, her voice clear and confident. "The Restoration is ready for departure. Ready not just to travel the stars, but to continue the work of restoration, of ships, of lives, of hope itself. For in the end, that was the greatest journey of all."